Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning or good evening for those of you who are online around the world. So probably not the hardest gig to have the first one after lunch. The one before lunch or before afternoon tea or the end is the tough one. But for those around the world, hopefully you can bear with me. I feel woefully unqualified to stand in front of this group of people and those of you online. I'm not a standards person. I've not spent much of my career developing or implementing or monitoring standards, so I do feel woefully inadequate in talking with you. But my colleague, Dr. Zafar, thought that it might be handy for me to give some thoughts from my experience in how we work with geospatial standards. Just for some background and context, so you know where I'm coming from, because everyone has a bias, and I certainly do. I'm a land surveyor by profession, so I come from a surveying perspective, spent a lot of my career working in aerial mapping, and then, of course, a lot of around digital delivery via GIS and geospatial systems, so there's some biases there. So Margie, if you could click away. The one slide on my company, Woolpert. So Woolpert's a global company specializing in geospatial information. So we capture information, we manipulate geospatial information, and we deliver it and integrate it with for our clients across business and government, increasingly around the world. Woolpert's an American company from origin. I come from a company here that some of you might have heard of called AAM, or Australian Aerial Mapping, which is around for, I think we're sort of 65 years old now, and we joined Woolpert about 3 years ago. So it's been a really fun journey for us. What do? We capture information from satellites, from aeroplanes. On any one day in Australia and New Zealand, we probably have 7 or 8, 9 aircraft, and Papua New Guinea, flying around, capturing a lot of LiDAR, a lot of imagery. We spend an inordinate amount of money with our friends from AWS up the road there, which is a source of great frustration to me, but I think they like it, processing all that data. And we work for a range of clients in this part of the world, but probably unlike our American friends, we probably spend more of our time and get more of our business from the private sector, from industry here in Australia, than we do from government. So we dig big holes in the ground here in Australia to dig out iron ore and coal and some other minerals. So we have a lot of business with those guys. So again, some biases. Next one, please, Margie. So I'm speaking to a bunch of people who live and breathe standards. So I'm apologise, you know this stuff way better than what I do. But obviously, standards build a reliable foundation and make things scalable and allow us to collaborate and work together with each other. It's sort of obvious and self-evident. From somebody who works with standards and geospatial standards and specifications, from an industry perspective, I think probably fair to say I have a love-hate with standards. At times we love them, and other times they're imposed on us and we go, we hate those standards, it's just making our hands be tied. But probably more on the love than the hate, to be fair. Next one, please. So these are, obviously quite flippant and silly examples, and I was trying to actually find the one where the two railway gauges, or two railways being built from both ends, and with 2 different gauges, and they didn't meet up correctly. But my skills with generative AI and Microsoft Copilot didn't quite get me there, so apologies. So we got sort of a railway line and a bridge that doesn't meet up, but I think you get the idea. If these people had have used standards, they might have got those two situations to line up a little bit better. Next one, please. So what do I think we sometimes do, though, in geospatial? We're very good at solving problems. We love technology. Who here loves technology? Come on, admit it. You all love technology. Sometimes we love technology too much, I think. And Sissy, you didn't put your hand up, but you love technology too much as well, okay? And I think sometimes that we sort of think, because we're so good at solving problems, we sort of we jump into things, and we can always solve the problems a little bit down the track, and we can glue things together with APIs and a whole bunch of stuff. I think that to be more effective, we really need to step back and think about what it is we're trying to do before we start doing it. We need to think about who we're working with, who are our stakeholders. I think we're very naive as a group of professionals around things like business models and intellectual property and risk. It's all tech. I'm telling you, I'm a technology person, and in my life, in my business, just up the road there, 80% of my time is not about tech. It's about business. So I think that's an opportunity for us. Next one, please. Zafar, I think this is this your slide, or did you steal this from somebody?
It's copyrighted.
I got it from you. So acknowledgement to Dr. Zafar.
There's a Z inside.
So I saw this Zafar was used this slide on something else we were working on, and I liked it. I do really like this slide. I think it really, for me, I'm not really a practitioner around standards. It sort of shows me this sort of hierarchy or taxonomy of how standards fit together. And again, I think when we get this right and we sort of work from an international ISO potentially down to national, then down to specifications, and then on to things like guidelines and standard operating procedures, it really does create a great framework for, again, people like us when we're working for government or industry to deliver great work. Next click, please, Margie. Just again, to be honest, I don't probably spend that much time thinking about international standards or even national standards, but I do spend a lot of time working with specifications. So I guess they fit within that taxonomy there. Next one, please. Projector, you put this slide together for me, and I still don't actually know what the problem is on this map, but I think the point is that, when we're not using the correct standards, we get the wrong outcomes. And sometimes, it's not actually apparent. I think the one on the left, we're saying that the controls is not matching up with the actual imagery. So the imagery probably looks great, and we deliver that to our clients, and everyone's happy, but it's not in the right spot. Kunal, I think you know this problem. I think the one on the right showing straight out inaccuracies in the map, and they're probably a little bit easier to see. But I think the point is quite clear. When you're not using appropriate standards and we're not using appropriate quality systems and checks to work within those standards, we don't get the right outcomes. Next one, please. So again, from an industry perspective, we do like standards. It does make our life easier to have a standard framework that we're working towards. And you have a lot of technology people in our organisation, and they like working to standards. From my perspective, when we actually have a clear understanding of what it is we're working towards, it absolutely improves the business outcomes. So better outcomes for us as a business and better outcomes for our clients and stakeholders. It helps us to be more efficient because we can standardise our systems and processes. It helps with quality, same reason, standardise, we can systemise things. One that we never talk about in these geospatial technical things, it helps us with investment certainty. If we understand the rules that we're playing by, we invest. If we don't understand the rules and they're changing, we don't invest. That's business. That's how it works. And then that flows down to business success, and then that flows down to stakeholder success, whether it be BHP or Rio Tinto, or whether it be the citizens of Sydney using the maps that we make for the local government here. Next one, please, Margie. Now, this one is my questions to you, because I don't know the answer to this one, guys. I really, I was lying awake last night thinking about this, trying to figure out what I should say about this sort of innovation versus standards paradox. And I know there was a little bit of talk about this morning. I don't really know this one. It's that debate about how do we embrace technology? How do we use this technology that's going at a more rapid pace than any time in human history? But at the same time, agencies like yours, Craig, you make authoritative data that people actually rely on. It could be hydrographic charts for navigation at sea. It could be cadastral maps that people rely on as a basis for property and banking, or it could be the GNSS that we all just take for granted that makes sure we're all in the right place. How do we get this sort of balance between this innovation that's constantly coming at us in the world and then putting the brakes on a little bit and applying standards to that? I really don't know the answer to that. I think, as far you were saying to me before, policy is always a little bit behind, but it sort of catches up, and I guess the same thing we see here. Even just recently, last week in our organisation, a blanket policy came through that we're not allowed to use generative AI on our computers because there's just too much risk, and we have to use the branded generative AI from our main IT provider. So our company is catching up to the technology there a little bit. Next one, please, Margie. Oh, sorry, just click through all those. It's just the same points I've spoken to. Apologies. Keep going. And I did note, and again, I'm not familiar with it, I did note there is actually an ISO standard around innovation management systems. So it does seem that lots of people are thinking about this, but not something I've really researched. Next one, please. Cost. I think this came up this morning a little bit. Implementing standards does come at some cost. Again, from us, from an industry perspective, cost is tough. We don't want to invest in things that we don't need to. But when we do invest in these things, it helps our business. And the obvious one is ISO 9001. Pretty much all of us use ISO 9001. And I think, to be fair, it helps our business. It makes our business work more smoothly. We get better outcomes. I think it's the same with geospatial standards. The problem for us is there's so many geospatial standards, we never know which one you guys, our clients, want us to use. And then I know with governments, I'll often have too many standards or the wrong standards, and then I might be working with the construction sector over there, and they don't want to have any standards. They don't really care, so it can be a little bit tricky. Like I said, I think if we understand the rules that we're playing with, we actually quite like investing in systems and processes based around standards. And for those of you from maybe government who are letting contracts, we don't mind standards, but you need to cost the fact that it does actually cost something to implement those standards. And then when you sort of let a contract and company X says they're going to apply by the standard and company Y doesn't, well, then it's not apples with apples. And we see that a lot, unfortunately. Next one. Some common standards. These are just the ones that, just off the top of my head, and I'm sure there are others, these are the ones that we use a lot in our business. So obviously the OGC, we've been involved with OGC for a very long time. I'm really excited to see OGC evolving from sort of a quasi-academic body to a more industry-engaged body. So I think that's fantastic. Having said that, they've done great work over the years. IHO, probably the most rigorous set of standards and frameworks we work on anywhere. They're the best standards, and you have to work to them. It's very clear. But you're nodding, Alan, but also probably not necessarily adapting as fast to some of the opportunities in front of them as well, the IHO. Building smart when we're working, of course, into the engineering and construction. ISO, of course, ASPRS, for those of you who don't know, American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, probably the global authority on airborne mapping and remote sensing standards. And I mentioned there, if you can just click through a few more times, Maggie, I think we've talked about all those points down below, but just one more click. I mentioned Creative Commons. Now, I know Creative Commons is not a geospatial standard, but one of the things that we find is a barrier to the effective implementation of geospatial really reaching its full potential is intellectual property, and then the risk and reward of who owns data and how data is shared. The Kiwis, New Zealand government love Creative Commons, and I think in some ways it works quite well there. And I think that from my perspective, when we're looking at geospatial, we can't ignore the business aspects and just constantly think about technology, because the business is actually important. So maybe one to think about. Next one. I mentioned the ASPRS, an organisation I've known about for a long time and worked with a long time. So next slide, please. They've had their standards. I think the last standards came out in about 2011. Is that right so far? And then just last year, they did a significant update to the standards, and it's really good stuff, because what they've done is they've taken a somewhat clunky standard and they've made it much more, I was going to say, usable. They've made it much easier for the average user to go, I want to make this product, so what do I need to do, from whether it be ground control or the aerial triangulation or the checkpoints, what do I need to do to get to that outcome? It's not a rigorous specification, it's a standards framework that allows you to go downstream. So I commend you to have a look at the good work from ASPRS if you're not across it. Next one, and we'll wrap it up. From an industry perspective, this is just an example from our side of when we know that we're working to a fairly consistent framework, a standard or a specification, we're able to then really invest behind that and create systems and processes, and in this case, a sort of a product suite to help us implement those standards. In this case, this is our airborne LiDAR processing flow we call it LiDARnetics. And it's really just basically a pretty automated flow for planning a LiDAR survey, uploading the data from once it's been captured, pre-processing, adjustment, and then going through to make a series of products, and then even archiving of the data. So it's virtually fully automated. It's all in the cloud, and it's got checkpoints all along the way, so where humans intervene and check what's going on, and if they need to, they go deeper. Lots of templates that say, I can make this product spec or this product spec. But just a good example where we know what the rules we're playing by, we're able to then get behind that and go, right, we can systemize that and automate it. Next one, please. We love the FAIR principles in Woolpert, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. I was working with my colleagues Projector and Dr. Zafar on project recently, and we were looking at developing some specifications, and we sort of go, we should start with the FAIR principles, and then we sort of found they were a bit limiting. So what we did is we came up with, for this particular project, I think it was 6 or 7, is it, Projector? 6. So if you click through on the next couple, maybe just click right to the end of that, if that's okay. And please, this is not academic, this is not authoritative, this is just some stuff that we did on a recent project. And when we were thinking about how you would develop these specifications, we thought that they needed to be discoverable, easy to find, well documented. They needed to be accessible, because if you can find them, but you have to pay for them or something, there's not much good. Obviously, interoperability is critical. It's hard, but it's critical. They need to be repeatable so that people like us can then work out how to implement those standards. Authoritative for me is the big thing. I quite like standards, but I need governments and industry to say, okay, well, we're going to use those standards. I like that. But when they don't, and some do and some don't, it's tricky. And I think the last two are probably all things we're all learning. They need to be user-centric and they need to be extensible, because what we do today is redundant tomorrow. So they need to acknowledge that. Next one, please. So my last slide. As professional advisors and consultants, particularly within the geospatial space, I think probably fair to say we love and support the development and adoption of appropriate geospatial standards. Next one, please. As per the slide I was talking about before, when we can sort of get our standards to fit within a taxonomy that's sort of coming down from international to national, down to local, and then even then down to specs and guidelines, I think that works. It works really well. When people are just developing standards and specifications in isolation, it doesn't work so well from our experience. Next one. I think we've talked about this for the standards to be to be effective. They need to be authoritative, and they need to have been widely distributed and widely adopted. And of course, I mentioned ISO 9001 is a bit of a flippant example. 27001 for information security is one that seems to be pretty standard. We all seem to use that one. If I think about aerial mapping bias, the WMS standard that the OGC came up with is just if you're going to serve imagery, it's a WMS. So that's how it works. Interestingly, and another dig at you and Craig and your colleagues in ICSM, I think we do aerial mapping surveys for all of the jurisdictions in Australia and NZ, and every single one of them uses a completely different standard and specification. So that does make it a little bit tough for people like us. Next one. Like I said, if we can get appropriate use of standards from our perspective in industry, it helps business efficiency, profitability, stakeholder outcomes, and when we don't, we get worse outcomes. Next one. I touched on this before. This is a hobby horse of mine, so take it or leave it. I do think there's room for us to think about some of the business imperatives within geospatial standards. It doesn't seem to get talked about much, and I think it's important. And the final point there, which I did touch on before, I think, again, when you're specifying standards, if you're particularly, say, a government or large industry, it does come with some sort of cost to implement those standards. You need to recognise that. But if you do, and you allow the vendors to then implement those with that little bit of extra cost, the return will be significant for you in our experience. So I think that's about all I've got. I hope that, obviously not academic, not particularly technical, but just some thoughts from our perspective. So thank you, everyone.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot to pack in there. A lot of arguments I've heard previously. I can try and help you on the innovation standards point. From our perspective, standards represent knowledge, an accumulation of knowledge from real expertise in the room. So for me, innovation and standards go hand in hand. So once you innovate, create something new, you need to capture that knowledge, put in a standard. Once it's been captured, then you can share it, and you can innovate on a step-by-step basis. So I think that's the value of standards in that location. I do take the point that sometimes the standards need a lot of time to catch up. But if you look at some organisations, you mentioned OGC, for example, they've got a very big innovation program, which allows you to capture the standard as you go, and improve things. Yeah, so that's what I would say on that. But yeah, your other comments are good. I think that that work probably has to be done on the value of standards and how that affects bottom lines in businesses, which you alluded to. But there is a direct correlation there between making tasks easier, whether it's aerial surveying across a whole continent, and bottom line profits. So yeah, thank you very much, Brian. Does anybody have any questions for Brian? Yep, Jan.
Thank you very much. At least one question. One of them is that you mentioned that the problem with standards, there was something like there are two main standards. My question would then be, what would be alternative to the standards? If you want to have mobility or save money in the long term, could that be vendor-specific solutions? Then you have to cope with different organizations, using different vendors, and come to what data to them.
Did you get that, Brian?
What's that? I don't know. I just said something, you know, I said there seems to be a lot of standards. Look, I think that, you know, obviously I don't want the whole world to revolve around one industry, you know, industry vendor standard. That's not what I like. But I do think if I just take some of the work that we do, often I will find standards that literally are the same standard, literally competing with each other. So I might be doing it in New Zealand on this standard, in Australia on this standard, and to be honest, there's actually not that much difference. And then you go to America, where we're doing almost the same work, and we're using different standards. So that's what I want to do too. So we can try to go back up to the international level and then use that as the framework for coming down more locally. That's probably my own.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Brian? Yeah.
Brian, you were talking about LiDAR and the work that you're doing across multiple jurisdictions and the difference of requirements in their specifications. How much is that costing you internally of doing this work in multiple times, in multiple millions a year? So, okay, so, but it's costing you significantly, because you've had to address different requirements from jurisdictions. And can we, as an industry, assisting and reducing that cost too?
Don't have been up in governments, so they give us quite a lot of work. But if all of the state governments in New Zealand got together and agreed that at least at the higher level, the standard they use to capture LiDAR and imagery is the same. Yes, downstream, everybody might make slightly different products. No problems. But when Tasmania thinks that what they do is different to Victoria, which is different to New South Wales, it's just not over the top of it all. That's all that works the same price. Yes.
Okay.
I think the Americans, I'm a billion miles ahead of us.
All right, Frank, you've got to put down inquiry into that next year.